Good morning and welcome to the Standing Committee meeting for Wednesday, January 13, 2021. Council will continue to meet virtually until further notice. Meetings can now be viewed live on the city's channel and live streamed on YouTube. Our first order of business is public comment. However, today we have no registered public speakers. Therefore, we will move directly into our Standing Committee agenda. And will the clerk please take the roll?
Reverend Burgess.
Here.
Mr. Coghill. Ms. Gross. Mr. Kraus.
Here.
Mr. O'Connor.
Here.
Mrs. Cal Smith. Ms. Strasburger.
Here.
Mr. Wilson.
Here.
Logic behind
Mr.
voting it down, like that we are going to use it for something that is
You said,
Madam Clerk, I'd like to also say here.
Okay,
Me too, Madam Clerk.
present.
Gotcha.
8 members present.
Gotcha.
thank you. Our first committee of the day is Finance and Law, which is chaired by myself. We have 2 new papers, first being Bill 1031.
Bill 1031. Resolution to authorize and direct the incurring of non-electoral debt through the issuance of a series of general obligation bonds of the city in the maximum aggregate principal amount of $64,655,000.
Motion to approve with discussion.
Second.
Discussion, Councilman Kraus?
I believe we have members from the administration here to speak to the bill. I know there was a briefing for council members yesterday.
Yes. We have Director Anderson with us. I know we have Mr. Hutchinson with us. But why don't we begin with Mr. Anderson? If you would just introduce yourself for the record, give us a brief overview.
Great.
Douglas Anderson, Director of Finance. Am I able to share my screen? I'm not able to do that.
I don't know.
Let me check.
Here it is.
You can see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So we're here to discuss first of all, I'd like to introduce myself, Douglas Anderson, Director of Finance. I also have Jennifer Gula, Assistant Director of Finance. We also have Matt Stasinski, our Financial Advisor, who also helping us this morning. Folks from Davenport and Company will be joining us or have joined us, and also our bond counsel, Clark Hill. So first, I'd just like to jump right into it. What you see here, interest rates trends, this is a good time for us to borrow. We're borrowing $55 million for this year for capital projects. Here we go into our existing debt service. The graph on the left gives you kind of a historical perspective of our debt service beginning in 2017. You can see how much we were putting towards debt service back then. The graph on the right gives you a example or shows you our current debt structure. We are much better off than we were back in 2017, and we'll be better off again in 2027 when we hit that cliff. And even with our, sorry, we'll go to our next slide here. Here's just, we're proposing 2 scenarios, scenario 1, scenario 2. We're recommending scenario 2, the structured wrap debt service. This will allow us to, with our current financial situation, our revenue, with the revenue problems we are having because of COVID. On the front end, we won't have to pay that much. We'll only be paying $2.7 million from 2016 or 2022 to 2026. And then we will go back to our level debt service at 2027. And I'll turn it over right now. I'll turn it over to Matt Stasinski. He can discuss this preliminary market estimate.
So good morning. Can you hear me okay? This is Matt
Yes.
Stasinski. Good morning, Council. Good morning, members of the administration and the general public. The purpose of this slide is to give Council some insight as to why we'll call it, some clarity as to the difference between what's shown in the debt resolution of $64 million. We had to show a not to exceed amount in there to meet the Debt Act, of course, and we have to model. We attempted to model both scenarios that you saw on the previous slide. In doing so, we had to we'll call it bump up the not to exceed amount. But in actuality, the slide, what we're going to issue, and this has been the case in prior years, just so you know, we had to bump up the not to exceed amount. But the likely structure of the bond issue is going to look like this: sources and uses. That's on page 5 that you see before you. We likely will issue no more than $45 to $50 million of bonds, and will likely produce a net premium of anywhere from $10 to $5 million. The whole point is we are going to target issuing just enough bonds and incurring, and we'll call it, and receiving just enough premium to match the uses underneath at the lower portion of that slide, which equates to $55 million in project funds and covers the cost of issuance. So I just didn't want you to have any disconnect between what shows up on the debt resolution. This is what we'll likely size to. We won't issue 1 penny more than we need to cover the project funds of $55 million and the cost of issuance. And while the modeling for the debt service, both by Office of Management budget and in the debt resolution, is done at a 5% interest rate, that's done again to make sure we have the flexibility within the structure and in order to make sure we comply with the Debt Act. The likely interest rate and the current market is, as you see at the bottom of the page, approximately an all-in true interest cost of 2.45%. That is lower than the city issued, a lower interest rate than the interest rate achieved in the marketplace in March of 2020. So you're really at historic lows. The interest rates have been creeping up a little bit in the last couple of weeks, but we are still below where we were in 2020, which was we thought was the historic low then. Of course, this is all a function of what's happened in the marketplace as a result of COVID, and we do see rates creeping up over the course of 2021. But we're attempting to get into the market while the market is still very attractive, and there's we'll call it a very strong interest in municipal bonds in the current marketplace. So with that, I'll stop and turn it back to Director Anderson.
Thanks, Matt. Our next slide just shows our schedule. As you see, January 13th, we're here in council discussing, and then hopefully on January 19th, council will deliver their final approval for this, the resolution. And then there you can see the rest of the schedule. Before I close, the one thing I'd like to mention, part of this is trying to figure out an underwriting team for this process. And in the past, PNC Bank has been our underwriter for a number of years. They've been the lead underwriter. They're still involved in the process. They will be a co-underwriter. However, this year we have chosen 2 minority firms, Siebert Shanks Williams and Luke Capital, to be a senior lead underwriter and a co-underwriter. So I just wanted to mention that. With that, we will take questions. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, do I have the floor?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, you do.
No, that's okay. Thanks. Just my questions are very brief. First, I want to thank you for this year selecting a minority firm to guide us through this process, and I appreciate those efforts. Secondly, my question is one of the 2 different scenarios that are being offered. We are not voting on a scenario. We are voting on the totality. The actual scenario selected will be chosen, which at the time we go into our refinance is the most beneficial to us. Do I understand that correctly?
That's correct. We are recommending scenario 2, but yes, you are voting that you are not voting on a particular scenario.
Good. Thank you very much for your effort, and I appreciate your help.
Thank you very much. Councilman O'Connor?
Yes, I want to thank everybody for the conversation we had yesterday in the executive session, or whatever we want to briefing, I guess I'd call it. I think just a couple things that stood out. I did ask the question because we seem to be having a plan to do this for a number of years ahead. So if somebody from yesterday, and I wasn't expecting the answer today, but maybe over the weekend or even Monday or Tuesday, just to show us what that debt would look like, because it looks like we're going to be borrowing a couple $100 million over the next like 3 or 4 years. So just what that debt service would do to us in the long run, considering, as we all know, we don't spend all this money that we borrow in a year. So, is it worth us taking a year off of getting a bond, taking 2 years off of getting a bond if we're going to do all this? So that was just a question that I had yesterday, and I'm sure somebody will follow up with me on that side. And I do have just one quick question. And I can't remember this. Are we a little bit later in this process than we were last time, or is this relatively the same time of year? Was it a little delayed from when we used to do
this year? I think it was delayed last year.
it? Was delayed last year. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Doug. Take care. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other members? Councilman Coghill?
Yes. Thank you, Doug, for being here. I just had a quick question on the minority firms that we are hiring. I'm glad to see that, but are they local or are they out of state?
I think they have local offices. I mean, Matt Stasinski, if you can chime in here. I believe one of them has a local office that's right across the street, but I think Loop Capital may, and I think Siebert's out of New York.
Director Anderson, if I might, they are both national firms. They are both large national minority firms. I think Siebert is headquartered in Chicago, Loop in New York. They do have some presence and have served in great capacity within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and other financings. Pennsylvania Turnpike, the PWSA, the county, Philadelphia. So they have tremendous, we'll call it background in serving in this capacity elsewhere in the Commonwealth.
Okay.
Councilmen, both have worked on bond issuances for the city in the past.
Okay, that's good. I don't question the means and the rates and how you're going about it with the number 2 option versus a number 1 option. I do have concerns. I do not like to incur debt, in my own life, and over as to council as well. And I understand the times we're in that it's nice to, have those finances readily available. But Doug, I just wanted you to tell the other members, if you would, about the 10% of bad use that we talked about yesterday. And just from my understanding, I want the other members to know bad use is not necessarily a bad thing. It is really setting 10% aside, from what I understand, to use for emergency if a house falls over the hill from a landslide and things of that nature. So just elaborate a little bit for the other members that weren't in on that conversation. I think that's very vital to be able to have access to that 10% for emergency use. And are we or are we not going to have that access to that 10% for emergency?
I'll actually turn that over to Matt Stasinski if he could talk about that.
And Director Anderson, while I appreciate you turning it over to me, this is a legal question and a very delicate and we'll call technical legal question that bond counsel is superior at answering rather than myself. So I would ask if the communications manager can open the mic for Andrew Marr or Ron Stout. We'll let the bond counsel serve because that is a very technical legal question. Thank you. Andrew? Andrew, we can't hear you.
Hi, this is, hello?
Okay.
Hello?
Andrew, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. Hi, this is Andrew Marr. I'm with Clark Hill Bond Counsel for the city. Concerning the question, the 10% bad use, the rule comes from the IRS prohibition on the use of the proceeds of tax exempt debt for purposes which the code disfavors. However, for general obligation debt, the code permits a certain percentage, in this case 10%, of use that is, quote, bad use, which is just use for purposes that is not strictly speaking provided for in the Internal Revenue Code for tax exempt debt obligations. So the long and the short of it is the city is permitted to use a small portion of the proceeds of tax exempt bonds for purposes which are not strictly speaking allowed under the code in certain circumstances. So what we would do is we would account for that money and make sure that we don't run afoul of the tax rules, but strictly speaking, a small piece of the tax exempt debt bond proceeds from this issue can be used for emergencies.
So I'll take that as a yes, as to we will have access. It would be a shame to borrow all this money and then if we need something for an emergency, not to have access to it for that purpose. So that's important to me in voting for it. So from what I understand, that we do have access to it and we can use it in any limitation that we like. And, without getting into any legalities, I hope it's the case and moving forward, I will support it. Again, I'm not for incurring debt, but just want to make sure we have access to that, as Director Urbanik so astutely brought up yesterday. So is that a yes? I mean, are we going to have access to 10% for an emergency?
Correct.
Okay, good deal. I'm done.
Thank you. Any other members?
Mr. Lavelle.
Councilman Burgess.
Yes. First of all, thank you for your hard work. I think, though, that while we are discussing this, I think this is also on a parallel, given that rates are so low, given that we're in a pandemic and we are going to probably see massive amounts of people being taken from their houses, of foreclosures and eventually foreclosures and probably people being thrown out of their apartments. I think the affordable housing crisis that we have in our city may increase over the next couple of years as we recover from the pandemic. And given that rates are so low, we had met with the URA, and I'm going to certainly ask now in a public way that we convene a meeting with the URA and the Pittsburgh Finance Department to talk about monetizing the Housing Opportunity Fund into some sort of long-term bond. What that really means is instead of using the 10 million a year every year, but to use that to take out a bond of, let's say, somewhere between 80 and 150 million dollars, so that we can jumpstart programs and projects right now when the need is great. Because every year, although we do a little, every year the problem increases, and I think the problem is going to intensify. And so that's my ask, and Councilman Lavelle and I and Councilwoman Strasburger, we have an interest in this. And so Doug, tell me how we start this conversation. I'm starting the conversation, but is it, and we've had, bond counsel with the URA at one point. How do we jumpstart that conversation again in this time?
Of course, Councilman, I'd be available. Our office is available to meet with you and Councilman Lavelle and the URA to discuss this further. I would ask Matt Stasinski to join us as well to discuss this. So we're open to whatever you'd like to do. we did open to discussion.
Okay, I will talk with Councilman Lavelle and Councilman Strasburger with the URA and with the mayor's office and set up a virtual meeting so we can begin to look at what this could look like. But you now already kind of know what we're interested in. So your staff and the bond council that you have can begin to think about from our city's perspective, what that could possibly look like, if that makes some sense, given our other obligations. And so that when we go into the meeting, it can be, based on, best knowledge at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other members? Councilwoman Gross?
Thank you, and I thank the administration for the briefing yesterday. I asked some questions yesterday that I would like to follow up on from the administration. Oh, when I was in the briefing, we were in different briefings since, for the public's information, we don't get in a room, even a Zoom room, for more than 4 members. So I was in a room with Councilman O'Connor after the other discussion that Councilman Coghill and others were in. And we asked specifically about how much capital is in hand from previous borrowings. And there's actually a term for it that I think I wrote down here. These will be unspent bond proceeds. So the proceeds, given that we borrowed them years ago. And there are really good results from the last 2 years of borrowing, from the 2020 and 2019 borrowing, that we've spent not half, but actually more than half on one of the years, I think, or right around there. So anyway, we've implemented and gotten off the ground the projects for which we borrowed. So, I mean, just a reminder for the public, you borrow capital funds for permanent things. You can't borrow bond funds for like paying payroll or something like that. You have to have permanent assets. And I'm sure that the members of the administration could say that in a much more technical way than I just said it. But the point is to, build the thing or fix the thing, maintain your asset or create a new asset quickly, like in a few years. Even though you're taking 20 years to pay it off. It's actually against the law with the IRS to borrow large sums of money and then sit on them for 20 years and just use them for investment or try to get interest income off of them. You really are supposed to be putting the dollars within 2 or 3 years into physical things, buildings, pipes, streets, infrastructure, right? You're supposed to be hard assets that you're building with these bonding issuances. But when we asked about earlier borrowings, dollars that we've had for a long time, we're not doing as well at moving the dollars that we borrowed before 2019. So those are lumped together in the presentation that we got under kind of like sports facility improvements in a very broad category. And out of what I wrote down, out of $188 million borrowed, there's maybe only 80 million that's kind of already gone out the door and into an asset. But there's an additional 100 million or so that's encumbered, meaning it's about to be moved and built or repairing something. So that leaves about $60 million that is unencumbered and unspent. And my concern is that we can't just kind of have ideas and then borrow for them and not do them, because you're not allowed to do that. And it's easy for us to do that, right? We see the capital 5-year plan. We have these ideas and goals, but we can't just borrow against ideas. We have to actually do the things. And it takes staff to manage the movement of those projects. It takes, even if you're using subcontractors, even if you're giving someone really big contracts to do the work, like someone else's crew from a paving company or a engineering company, we need our own people to make sure there are controls, to make sure that the deliverables happen, to make sure that the construction is implemented in a way that isn't dangerous or irresponsible. We get complaints a lot from subcontractors who are out in our neighborhoods doing work that isn't being done well. And we have to, from just in the last month, porta-johns being left on streets and paving not being put back correctly or not being implemented correctly. Something I know Chief Gilman cares deeply about and has deep concerns over the way our contractors are implementing their contracts around paving, especially. So my question is, we have basically 60 million in hand from previous years borrowing that we can reallocate and move, right? We can encumber. And so maybe I turn it over to Mr. Hutchinson and say, his response to me yesterday was, well, you voted on a 5-year capital plan, and this bond issuance is to fulfill that 5-year capital plan. I actually voted no, but everybody else voted yes. And so, or maybe I voted yes on that. I think I voted yes on the capital budget, but not the operating budget. So maybe you could just speak to some highlights of what this bond issuance is meant to pay for, and the time frame and your confidence level of how confident you are that we're actually going to be able to move that money for the thing it's determined for. It is not for affordable housing, for example, right?
Correct. Yeah, good morning. David Hutchinson, Assistant Director for Capital and Asset Management with the City's Office of Management and Budget. I have to start with a correction. I gave you bad information yesterday. Councilmember Gross, I was moving too fast. We actually have 8 million left. It's good news. We only have 8 million left, not 80 million left in the kind of 2012 through 2017 bond.
That is a giant difference. So
difference.
that is
Again,
$72 million difference.
I apologize. I should have done the work to actually do the Excel instead of just.
That changes my feeling about this bond issuance. Like, yeah, I
Mine too.
left that briefing thinking that doesn't make much sense.
Yes, I apologize. That's 100% my fault. So yeah, out of 188 million in the bonds we had for 2012 through 2017, we have about 4 million left under contract that we need to pay invoices on, and then another 8.3 million that's unencumbered. So those are the available funds for those. And as you referenced, for 2019, we've either spent or encumbered about 2/3 of that money. And then for 2020, we've spent or encumbered about 40% of that money, which I think, given the conditions this year and some of the work stoppages, is a pretty impressive number. So a lot of praise goes out to DPW and to DOMI and our procurement team for working on more kind of flexible options for them with procurement and being able to get things issued out faster. So that's been a big part of OMB's push the last few years, has been to give those departments the tools they need to be able to go out into the field and do bids, to be able to react in real time and not necessarily get tangled up in the contracting side. So that's been a huge asset for us, is Jen Olzinger's work on that and getting kind of the ITQs up and running and a lot of those tools available for the department. So it feels like the pace is actually quickening. So that's the good news.
I think you have good empirical evidence to say that the pace has definitely, most certainly quickened. And I do think that the ITQ system has been really the game changer there. We did the same thing at PWSA a few years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, and it made all the difference because you didn't have to put out one giant $20 million contract to the street where only 2 people could bid on it and have that kind of stuff. So it also, if council will remember, we were enthusiastic about that change also because it allowed us to give bids to smaller, more local, more diverse contractors. And so that's been a really good change.
Yeah, those are kind of the 3 pieces, what you're describing: the money, the ability to procure, and then the talent, the staff, the project managers who are actually moving the project. So I agree, making sure that we're keeping a good balance between our capital funds and our staffing for the program managers or project managers to run those projects is really crucial.
So the highlights of what is the projects for this bond issuance?
Yeah, so it's all in the capital budget. The 55 million is what was passed in council's budget in December. There's individual deliverables for each project that tells you what the fund source is. There's kind of a roll up at the project level towards the back of the budget that's 2 pages long that shows by department and fund source kind of where those bond funds are going.
Right. So again, people can pull up the capital budget on the OMB website or just kind of Google, City of Pittsburgh capital budget. And you said it's in the last 10 pages or so, distribute a bunch of those pages.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's important because I have the same concerns. We add to our, I like to call it payments to Wall Street every time we do one of these borrowings, right? And so a chunk of our revenue is going for this debt service, right? And it's significant. It was really deeply concerning. And I brought this up yesterday in the briefing when I first got onto council, and it was 2014. And I was in a budget hearing, I think. And I first saw the chart that some $80 million that year was going to principal and interest. And our revenue that year was closer to 500 million than it is to 600 million. And it just seemed really too high. That was before we had a bunch of bonds be paid off and kind of saw a drop in our principal and interest payments. I asked this yesterday in the briefing, so just to recount it, it makes me nervous to keep adding these big borrowings because we don't want to see those payments to Wall Street become, nearly 20% of our revenue. That's just too high. But it isn't, right? I was assured because there's a kind of, you've looked deeply ahead. And so we'll be seeing another drop off in bond payments, but bonds get fully paid off. And so we're kind of keeping it at a lower level. It still does make me nervous as well. But unfortunately, there are many, many decades of deferred maintenance and inequalities and disinvestment that we're making up for. Or everything from landslides to entire neighborhoods that are basically being rebuilt, right? And this is not maintenance. This would be at a much lower level if we were just fixing things, but we let them go to the extent that we're almost building new. And a lot of these things last almost 100 years. So especially when we're, at PwC, you're looking at infrastructure that will last 80, 90 years, but we're replacing it because it's over 100 years old now and it's literally disintegrating. So I was really leaning towards no before you corrected those numbers about the money in hand. But since we are A, moving it, and B, not sitting on a bunch of money that we didn't have the capacity to spend, I'm feeling a lot better about it. And so I'll be voting in support. But thank you for clarifying that because it was really giving me misgivings. And I appreciate all the detail. That's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members? Councilman Coghill?
Yes. I know this is not on the table today, but I've heard talk about it yesterday and also today about borrowing against the Affordable Housing Care Fund. And I understand the urgency and the importance of that. My first question is, what do we have in that fund right now?
Well, it's $10 million a year. So we just approved our budget. So this year we'll be sending the next $10 million over. We also approved the allocation plan on how to spend those dollars.
Okay, so we have that allocated. So when we're talking about borrowing, about $100 million from that fund, and Matthew, maybe you can jump in here. We'll use 5% interest rate just for a conservative figure. So we're talking $5 million that we will not have access, $5 million in debt interest that we will be paying over the course of that loan. Is that right?
If I may, just to give you some additional context to it. So when we initially set the fund up, there was conversation then of actually leveraging it to go to a bond. The idea is if you know that over the course of, let's just say the next 8 years, you're going to move over 80 million, as opposed to waiting every single year to spend $10 million, which may get you a net result of 50 new units of housing. But at the same time, we know we have thousands of shortage. Why not go to bond, get $100 million, and clearly we're just playing with numbers right now. And now all of a sudden you could put those dollars to work right now And so as opposed to trying to do 50 units a year, maybe all of a sudden you could be doing 1,000 units and really addressing the problem. And given that, you have a guaranteed source of revenue to pay that bond off, you would just pay it off over time using the $10 million that otherwise would have gone to the Housing Opportunity Fund. However, a couple years ago, when we first explored this and actually had a meeting with PNC at the time and the URA and some others, I think Reverend was there, what we were told was we had not yet demonstrated that we could actually spend the money. Because in order to go to bond, you have to be able to demonstrate you can spend the money, I believe, in about 5 to 7 years. And so because the HOF was new at that time, we couldn't demonstrate that if we did that, that we'd actually be able to spend all the money down. However, pre-pandemic, in our last meeting, PNC followed back up and said, well, you have absolutely now demonstrated you can actually spend the money, because not only are we spending the $10 million a year, we can also show a back order of development projects that are literally waiting there and hoping they can get in line for the next pot of funding. So we can now actually demonstrate that if you did this, you would absolutely be able to spend the money down.
Okay, so the money is allocated that we have in there, and the building has started, or no?
Excuse me. So the $10 million fund is used for a variety of things. So it's been used to help people with down pay, closing cost assistance. It's been used to help fill gaps on new affordable housing construction. So it's been used for social services, to keep people, to help people pay their rent when they've lost their job due to the pandemic. So it's been utilized for a whole lot of different things.
Yeah, and I think that's great. Doesn't change the fact that we're paying a lot of money in interest, and I understand the rates at this time are very favorable. Maybe a 2.5–3% rate on it, which makes it, strike while the iron is hot, not knowing what the rates will be in the near future. So, okay, I just had, those questions, and, I just didn't want to go on a borrowing frenzy for everything at this point, just because we can get a good rate. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Councilman Cross.
do we have an amendment to offer on this bill? I have something in my email.
I do not. I'm not aware of an amendment.
It's in the materials I received this morning. There's an amendment to 1031 presented by yourself.
I missed that.
Madam Clerk, am I on the wrong? Yeah, it's on for this bill. It came with my materials this morning. I got
We are showing that an amendment supposed to be presented by you, Councilman Lavelle.
Okay.
I believe it to be just technical in nature. If someone that is with us this morning might be able to further explain.
So you are correct. I apologize. I do have the amendment in front of me.
Yeah.
And I'm going through it, trying to see what the actual
changes.
It looks like under section 5A, there appears to be additional language added. That looks technical in nature, and I believe that's all though.
Okay. So it's under purchase proposal. There's a language added that is underlined, negotiated. Here, I'll read the whole thing. Purchase proposal means the written agreements, including any addendum thereto, for the purchase and sale of the bonds. And then what is added is to be negotiated by the parties thereto, the final form as approved by the city solicitor. So we did not have initially the city solicitor giving final approval. This adds the solicitor's approval.
So if it's okay, I'll be happy to offer the amendment.
Can we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? the bill is amended. Thank you, Councilman Cross, for catching that. Any other on the bill as amended? Councilman Burgess, you're on mute, but I see you trying to talk. You're still on mute.
How about now?
Yes, sir.
Just one quick thing that Mr. Coghill mentioned and that Councilwoman Gross talks about a little bit. Right now, certainly we use the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to fill in gaps of affordable housing for tax credit deals, right? And that's very competitive. It's a very small pipeline. But imagine if we had a large selection of money and we could give market rate developers money to put affordable housing units in their market rate housing deals. So let's say in the Strip District, right? If they were going, they're building like crazy in the Strip District. Let's say they're building all these high-end apartments in the Strip District or the South Side. We could incentivize them to make 10 to 15% of them affordable by using this fund. One of the fastest ways to do new housing, I think, to put new affordable housing online is to think of it differently. Instead of continuing to only think of it in terms of all affordable or mostly affordable projects, even mixed income development tends to be mostly affordable, right? 2/3 of it's usually affordable. We could put money into these market rate deals that are going to happen anyway, right? They're going to happen anyway. They're going to be built. We can just use a combination of this fund and the vouchers. And then we could incentivize it and or legislate it in terms of zoning. There's a variety of ways we could do it, that we could get these developers to put 10 to 15% of those units affordable. And when you do the math over the next 3 or 4 years, you would significantly increase the amount of affordable units, number one. And then number two, you would not be concentrating the poverty. You'd be putting these affordable units in high-end development. And so they would be, housed in places, and they have children, depends on their situation though, but they would also, have other role models. They would not be isolated and or, concentrated. So I'm just saying with that kind of dollars, we would be able to do some things very differently than we're doing now. And I just want to at least bring up the idea so that why the bond is so attractive. We could do some many novel things to really jumpstart affordable housing in a different way.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Second round. Councilwoman Gross.
I know this is like actually kind of a tangential conversation, but it'll be interesting, I think, for us to explore how we definitely need more dollars for more units. We know that we need more units in the city, right? That's well established from the work of Councilman Burgess and Lavelle and some 80, I think, citizens on the housing affordable housing task force. But in this time of crisis, we're also balancing the need for non-asset stuff, right? So as Councilman Lavelle said, the affordable housing, the Housing Opportunity Fund was really dispersing a lot of rent stabilization funds. I mean, it wasn't just down payment money. People were just literally not able to eat and pay their rent. And, we've said it once, we've said it 100 times. We really need to talk about support from other levels of government. And yes, we're all lobbying for the feds to kind of do better. And the state is issuing a new round of PPP, I think, like that. There's some cash assistance coming to people, but if we are spending all of the funds that we could be building new housing, people are asking for social housing. If we're using up those funds to just help stabilize households, we have a hard time doing both things. So if we can't divert all of it, like today, no one is proposing we do, but we couldn't divert 100% of that $10 million a year to bond payments because people are trying to stay in their homes and feed themselves, right? And we're using some of those funds for actually cash assistance. So it's a at the city level of government, we're doing a lot, and we really need some assistance from other levels of government. I just wanted to acknowledge that, because sometimes people listening to us talk about technicalities and seeing our legislative agendas don't really listen to how much we're trying to do with very little pot of money. So thank you for that time. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Bill is recommended. Thank you all. That takes us to Bill 1032.
Bill 1032, resolution amending resolution number 507 of 2019, vacating a portion of Colwell Street and portions of R Way in the 3rd Ward, 6th Council District of the city by extending the expiration date of the payment from the property owners to the treasury of the city from 150 days to 605 days from the effective date of the resolution, August 1st of 2019.
Need a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Bill is recommended. That takes us to our invoices. We need a motion for the approval of the invoices.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Invoices are approved. That takes us to P cards for approval. We need motion on P cards.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? P cards are approved. That will take us to our Public Safety Services Committee, chaired by Councilman O'Connor. One deferred paper, Bill 145.
Bill 145, ordinance amending ordinance number 36 of 2019, amending and supplementing the Pittsburgh Code Title 6, Conduct Article 3, Dogs, Cats, and Other Animals by repealing Chapter 639 and replacing it in its entirety and adding a new Chapter 639 prohibiting the keeping, sale, exchange, adoption, exchange, or transfer of such animals in the city.
Motion to hold 4 weeks.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Bill will be held 4 weeks. Next, Public Works Committee, chaired by Councilman Coghill. Number of deferred papers, the first being Bill 482.
Bill 482, resolution granting unto 1505 East Carson Street LP their successors and assigns the privilege and license to construct, maintain, and use at their own cost and expense a new projecting sign at 1505 East Carson Street in the 17th Ward, 3rd Council District.
Motion to approve.
Second with discussion.
Discussion, Councilman?
Councilman Coghill, I'd like to offer up a motion to hold this for 8 weeks.
Very good. Motion to hold for 8 weeks.
Second.
All those in favor, 8-week hold, please.
Yes, please.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Bill will be held 8 weeks. Bill 955.
Bill 955, resolution vacating a portion of Wicklick Street, a 50-foot right-of-way laid out in the H.M. Bissell's Plan of Lots recorded in Plan Book Volume 11, page 64, in the 10th Ward, 7th Council District.
Motion to approve for brief discussion.
Second. I'll defer.
So I just want to start by saying, knowing this area like I do, and it really shines a spotlight on the difference between 7th Council District and the 4th Council District and others. And I was actually up in the neighborhood and talking to some of the neighbors with Councilwoman Gross, and I came to realize how important every blade of grass is in this district, right? I mean, here in the 4th District, we have yards and lots of things, but I feel like in some districts, whether it's a developer or, whatever it might be, every square inch of grass, I've come to realize is important. And, Councilwoman Gross has been a champion for this, I think for many years now. And I'm beginning to realize, how important it is for her neighborhood. So With that, I'll turn it over to the councilwoman if she wants to add or say something about it.
Thank you, Councilman. And before we were in a global pandemic, I always offered to put council members in my car and drive them around my council district. And I do that for new members and new directors in the city. And I always take them to this section of the district because it's one of the areas that's incredibly steep. And yet still development is continuing to kind of encroach up that hill. This portion of streets, I've always also said the last 7 years that I've opposed some like 30 some requests for street vacations where people just wanted to expand their site so that they could build more housing. And this one is not, they're not trying to take an entire street, but a portion of right away. But the neighborhood is opposed to it because again, these are kind of like steep streets where the intersections need sight lines, and there's just no desire to have those open space or sight lines narrowed to any extent. So I'm asking members to vote no on this street vacation. And also I was chatting with Councilwoman Smith yesterday about how kind of permits proceed to the city council agenda. And we had some thoughts about kind of how things aren't like they were 20 years ago. And not a request needs, maybe there should be higher standards for even applications for these kinds of things. So with that, I'll be voting no. And I hope that members will also reject this request for a street vacation.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion?
Yes, Councilman Lavelle.
Council President Smith?
Thank you. I just want to say that I'm going to respect that this is in Councilwoman Gross's district, although I do have concerns and I do want the director to talk a little bit about the hillside, because it's my understanding there's a little bit of concern with the hillside. So I want to talk about that. But I want to also say, Councilwoman Gross, what I said yesterday was council should sign off on the permits in our district, because at this point, there's so many things happening and we are not being informed and and we're not aware of some of the things that are happening, but yet we're the first ones to be held accountable for what happens in our district. So I think that we need to have some conversation about how council members have more of a say in what's going on in the neighborhoods they represent. That's what I said. And Director Ricks, could you talk a little bit about the vacation?
Yeah, and I'm trying to get some more specific information from my staff that oversee these applications. So the right-of-way in question, so this application has actually been in process for over 2 years now, and has been discussed with council staff, although not with the councilwoman specifically on it. The street in question, a portion of this block, which extends between McCandless and 53rd, I think I have to get my bearings right, has already been vacated, a portion of the right-of-way. So the full length of the full width of the right-of-way no longer exists for the entirety of this street. Again, these are old decisions that have been made, in the past. And so this application was seeking to clean up the property lines for consistency along that edge of the block. So that's just the background on this application and what is happening on this particular right of way. I think the councilwoman and I have spoken on many occasions that definitely believe that preserving public rights of way is a valuable thing to do, because once they're vacated, it's very difficult to reestablish them again. This case is a little bit different just because of decisions that were made in the past that create this inconsistent right of way right now. So just providing that as background, but obviously this is the jurisdiction of the council as to when vacations occur or not.
Okay, and then I'm just going to say, sometimes I hear when a lot of times people come to the table and they say they spoke with our staff, and that is not speaking to the council person. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. And not saying that you probably had staff, also having the conversations.
Yeah.
So, but so that doesn't, I think sometimes it has to be director to the council member. So I just want to make that clear too. I think that's part of the problem of why some of us are missing things that are happening in our district. So I'm going to stand with the councilwoman on this. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, can we do a roll call vote?
Yes, sir.
Reverend Burgess,
No.
Mr. Coghill,
No.
Ms. Gross,
No.
Mr. Kraus,
No.
Mr. O'Connor,
No.
Mrs. Cal Smith,
No.
Ms. Strasburger,
No.
Mr. Wilson,
No.
Mr. Lavelle Chair.
No.
I 0, noes 9, bills negatively recommended.
Thank you very much. That takes us on to our Land Use and Economic Development Committee, chaired by Councilman Wilson. One supplemental paper, Bill 1049.
Bill 1049, resolution to grant the legally allowable single 6-month extension to inclusionary housing interim planning overlay district as per the Pittsburgh Code Title 9 Zoning Code Article 3 Overlaying Zone Districts, Chapter 907 Development Overlay Districts, Section 90702C. Time limit has been filed by the Department of City Planning. Time limit, the expiry date of the district referenced in Section 90702K, known as iPod 6 Lawrenceville, originally set by code for January 25th, 2021, and shall be extended by 6 months to July 25th, 2021.
Motion to approve. Discussion.
Second.
I defer to Councilwoman Gross.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. So I appreciate council rule aiding this yesterday to appear on today's agenda. This is merely a 6-month extension of the Lawrenceville inclusionary zoning interim planning overlay district. It's been 18 months. I see Director Dash is with us. I know that some members expressed some interest in hearing an update. And I have some notes I chatted or texted and emailed with leadership in Lawrenceville yesterday to kind of get some overview. So from my perspective, it's been very exciting. One of, as we know, and you all sat through this discussion when we passed it initially unanimously, and it had been unanimously recommended by the Planning Commission. In the Lawrenceville footprint, the opportunity to gain affordable housing were in very large sites. So over the last 10 years, especially those kind of small single family dwelling rooftops had lost hundreds and hundreds, many hundreds of affordable apartments as they one by one got returned back to single family use. And so it was very difficult to think for the neighborhood of how do we get affordable units back, both apartments, many apartments, but also single family homes too, starter homes, homes in an affordable price range that a kind of normal Pittsburgher could buy. Those were also gone. So there was really a desire to say, we want more units, but as council was just discussing, right, there's a lack of cash for those affordable units, or a lack of a kind of narrow drip of just the LIHTC tax credits from the state that just don't fill the lack of the demand that we have here. And so this iPod was constructed for very specifically for the Lawrenceville community's needs. In the lots of consensus among the citizens, and tons of meetings and community plans, and a lot of participation over the course of a year in crafting the way this would turn out. So the opportunity there was that big developers would want to build big multi-unit buildings. And so how to get those big sites to include units at a lower rent level. And so this one, just as a reminder, ended up with a requirement in this zoning overlay that says if you're building a building with more than 20 units, that 10% of them should be affordable to families at half of the area median income. So at 50% of AMI. And there are units that should be completed this year already. And it's just been in place 18 months. So the very big site is at 40th and Butler, right in the middle of the neighborhood, kind of right at the beginning of like where 6th Ward turns into 9th Ward, right before you're going over the 40th Street Bridge. There's a 13-acre site. That developer had built 250 luxury units before the inclusionary zoning overlay was passed by council and refused at a series of 3 or 4 community meetings with 100 people in attendance demanding that they build affordable units. They just said, no, that's not what we do. And so, and they did not. But we passed the inclusionary zoning overlay and they just proceeded with their second phase of 356 luxury units. I think I've got that number right. Director, you can correct me. It's 350 or so. So those 35 units are under construction and set to be available later this year if the construction stays on schedule. And then secondly, this is, different than 800 other municipalities probably across the country. It was also, again, a source of deep concern among Lawrenceville residents that younger people who weren't wealthy couldn't buy a house. And so that idea of kind of affordable home ownership was really important too, that there not only be wealthy homeowners in the neighborhood. And so there's a requirement for affordability at 80% of AMI. And so we have another project about to go to construction that has all its approvals and has moved forward for, I believe, 5 units that will be available for purchase. But that will be held at an affordable level to 80% of the area median income. Part of what is interesting, because I know other of us have projects moving forward voluntarily. I have a project in the Strip District moving forward voluntarily with in a luxury building on the river's edge with some 10 or 15% affordable units, is how we do that administratively here on the city side to guarantee that that actually happens and is maintained. So I'm going to let Director Dash talk to that because it's been, these are the first projects. And so we've had to figure out like which parts city planning does and which parts housing authority does in the kind of how do we operationalize the rollout. So with that, I just wanted to give that feedback. I was reading from some of the comments from both Lawrenceville United and Lawrenceville Corporation that they gave me. In addition, that the legislation is the only mandatory inclusionary zoning policy to their knowledge in Pennsylvania outside of the State College area. And so this City Council Interim Planning Overlay District is really a leader in the state. And also a note that Millhouse reported absolutely no problem financing their projects. So there was no kind of negative backlash from the underwriters. I think that's really important to note. And I want to thank Lawrenceville Corporation, Lawrenceville United for noting that for me. And that also, and Director Dash can also speak to this, that there is of course, a keen interest in making this permanent for Lawrenceville. And that the Lawrenceville leadership is eager and willing to help if there are any expansion plans. So I'll stop talking there, Director. That's what I have from my side. And please share your perspective. Thank you. And introduce yourself for us.
Sure. Andrew Dash, Director of the Department of City Planning. Councilwoman, you covered most of everything that I had to cover on this. There have been outside of Arsenal 201, which is the 35 inclusionary units that have been approved under the interim planning overlay district. We have had pre-applications and discussions that haven't yet led to an application on other sites in the neighborhood. So there are other sites in the neighborhood, although those applications are not in yet, that we do anticipate coming in where the inclusionary zoning requirements would apply. So, that's why it's imperative to, number one, get this 6-month extension to the iPod and keep that in place. Number two, and I know that I discussed this a few weeks ago with members when you approved the authorization for us to go under contract with with HRNA over kind of a housing needs assessment and other housing work, is that we will be reassessing the housing market in Pittsburgh and looking at potential changes to the inclusionary zoning over time. So there's kind of a 3-step process here. Step 1 is what we're doing right now, which is extending the interim planning overlay district. Step 2 is making that permanent, which is something that will be coming to council in the first half of this year. But we have to hold public hearings and do that work as a part of that. And then the third step will be that work on the housing needs assessment and potential updates to make sure that the inclusionary zoning policy is one that matches the Pittsburgh market. That's the work that we did in leading to the iPod, but want to make sure that we're adjusting with the market for the inclusionary zoning requirements. So, so that second step will make it permanent, which will make it something that, in some of the communities in other districts that have outlined that they've wanted to see this either in their neighborhood plans they've been working with us on, or that they've wanted to also think about undergoing a public process similar to Lawrenceville, that we would be able to do that and expand that. And, like I said, then that third step is potentially tweaking the legislation based on the results of the housing needs assessment that's underway.
Thank you. And I wanted to point out too that it's important that these number of units be added, and it's that they're being added by the private market. That again, Lawrenceville is separately working with Action Housing on constructing another deeply affordable building at basically where the Doughboy statue is. That's going to be another 45 units or so of deeply affordable housing, in addition to the Penn Matilda project, which isn't Lawrenceville, but close to the edge at Bloomfield Garfield, that was completed by Action Housing some years ago. And also the Morningside School that was completed, that is a deeply affordable LIHTC project that also has 50 units. So while we have, as neighborhoods, been competitive in getting those LIHTC deals, this is over and above that, right? So as Councilman Burgess was talking about, we know that the Supreme Court of the United States has told cities that you cannot put affordable housing only in low opportunity, low resource neighborhoods, that it's incumbent upon cities in the United States to also add affordable housing in neighborhoods of opportunity, I think was the phrasing from the federal government. And these neighborhoods, especially Lawrenceville, within sight of downtown, lots of employment opportunity, close to large employment centers, lots of public transit, walkable neighborhoods, schools, churches, all of the things that the Supreme Court includes as neighborhoods of opportunity, are working really hard to add affordable units. And so I just want to commend the people of Lawrenceville for all this hard work. And so I'll just let other members ask questions if they have any.
Councilwoman Strasburger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I want to thank you, Councilwoman Gross, for your summary of how it's been going in Lawrenceville, and Director Dash, you as well, discussing kind of future plans with HRNA report that is upcoming that I'm really interested in seeing the results of. One observation I think was a positive but unintended consequence of the iPod is that some projects that have been developed, and maybe there's just one, and that's one in the district that I represent, but at the very least,
I mentioned this one in the Strip District that's under construction.
And maybe that one as well. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
They're seeing the writing on the wall. They're, without even being required to, they are at first proposal of a project, at the very least meeting the standards of the Lawrenceville iPod. in terms of the number of percentage of affordable units at 50% AMI. And that's in the district I represent, adjacent to Reverend Burgess's district. That's the Shakespeare Giant Eagle site, the Shady Hill site. So I think that's a really positive ripple effect from something like this. And that's why, I'm very interested in basically using this as not only a beneficial policy or iPod for Lawrenceville, but as a pilot, which I understand that to be, right, a pilot project almost to collect data, which I hope we are, I think we are, collect data, assess the both the benefits of it and the pain points. And then, one other observation is Lawrenceville is unique not only because of its very quickly changing property values, but also it has two very vibrant organizations that not every neighborhood is blessed to have. So I would want to make sure that, one, if we were to expand the iPod to other neighborhoods that we deem to be in need of it, or inclusionary zoning, let's just say, maybe not the iPod, that we're not just responding to communities that have a very strong voice because they have vibrant community organizations, that we're truly looking at the data and that we're not just responding to the squeaky wheel. And I'm not saying that Lawrenceville is just a squeaky wheel. It was absolutely necessary there, but I just want to make sure that all communities are getting the attention that they need, and that we're establishing a very predictable process, because predictability is important, not just for the establishment of inclusionary zoning, but also, I think we've seen evidence that someone who's proposing a development, developers in some cases care more about predictability than they care about some of the requirements that might be put on a project. So I think in both of those instances, the public process around establishing inclusionary zoning and understanding what that will look like, and establishing the predictability around, what they're being asked to do in any given neighborhood and knowing what's coming down the pike. I guess, Director, if you could respond to what we're doing to assess the data to ensure that we know the next neighborhoods that might be kind of subject to this, and whether we know that or not, whether that's going to be an HRNA report. And then two, what the public process might look like, or how we can duplicate the process and not reinvent the wheel every time.
Sure, and it was a great point you made around the Shady Hill, the Shakespeare site. That's not the only site, actually, and one advantage, to this, and I had it in my notes for today and not said it, was that we now have standards around what the inclusion of affordable units into a market rate development looks like. And so we've been able to apply that standard to, the discussions that have had around that site, or discussions that have had, and approvals that we now have for sites in Southside Works and some others, that are, voluntarily providing affordable units. And so whether that's the tenure of affordability to, the way that we treat those units compared to other units in a building, the standards have been able to act as a guide in places where, in communities where they don't necessarily have this as a mandatory requirement, but it is something that as these developments are going to Planning Commission, that residents and community organizations are pushing for inclusion of affordability in new market rate developments. To your question on kind of the expansion and the process for expansion, we've been as we've been kind of going through this process, when we had Grounded Solutions do work for us back in 2017, 2018, which led to a lot of the standards that are in the interim planning overlay district. One of the things that they did look at was, would this be something that could be citywide? Would this be something that, is best in a pilot? We decided to go the pilot route, understanding that the city housing market is very different in different neighborhoods, that, the discussions in your district, councilperson, or in Councilwoman Gross's district, and some, where we're having that conversation in Lawrenceville, are very different than, the needs of Homewood as we were going through the community plan there, or, or some areas of the West End where the housing market is just very different. And so we have been, at this point, really looking at that as a part of the neighborhood planning process. So, right now, affordability is, it is in the conversations, for example, in Oakland, where, we've been having action team meetings, and, that issue of affordability and, the possibility of inclusionary zoning is definitely something that has come from the community and from those discussions. And so we do see, as this becomes a permanent overlay that then gets expanded into other neighborhoods, definitely see areas like that where we're currently in the planning process, or areas like Manchester Chateau, where it was discussed as a part of an already completed and now adopted neighborhood plan, as places that we would expand once this is made permanent. And then, using the community process that, that the Lawrenceville organizations were great in helping us build, and really taking the lead on, and replicating that in other neighborhoods, that are interested. So, that does allow for some neighborhoods that may not be in a planning process, but do have capacity, and then the neighborhoods that that we were working, through a planning process with, which are, neighborhoods of varying capacity. I mean, where some of the neighborhoods that we're working in, definitely have more capacity. There are some neighborhoods that we've been doing these neighborhood plans in that, haven't had as much. And so we've been trying to address it in neighborhoods of more limited capacity in that way.
Thank you. That's helpful. So what I'm hearing is that regardless of whether a neighborhood has a neighborhood plan or is going through a neighborhood planning process, you would still consider, and regardless of their capacity in terms of community organizations, whatnot, you would still consider going into that neighborhood and establishing this sort of conversation if it's necessary there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd be willing to work with, especially as we get, through, we get through this extension. And again, that next step is making this permanent. So I think that one of the things as we go to make this overlay district permanent would be sitting down with all of you as members and understanding, where, understanding where we're planning, and if applying the overlay is important to bring into the discussion there, if it's not already in the discussion, as well as any other communities that you'd be looking for us to be starting those discussions down the road.
Thank you. The last thing I'll say is just that I've heard some murmurs of people, in the city, activists, advocates, calling for an inclusionary zoning plan as part of an anti-gentrification policy for the city, and saying you're not fighting gentrification unless you're establishing inclusionary zoning citywide. And I disagree with that. I think that's a sledgehammer approach, and we need a more surgical approach. As you mentioned, Director, the Strip District is not the same as Sheridan, it's not the same as Homewood, is not the same as Perry Hilltop. So you have to approach them all differently.
And we'll be addressing some of that, citywide, also in forging PGH in the comprehensive planning process. Understanding, the understanding, and the focus of the comprehensive planning process is really to focus on, people who have the potential to be displaced or are more likely to be displaced, or areas where there are more residents that are likely to be displaced. So we will be focusing housing strategies on that, whether it's inclusionary zoning or whether it's other policies that the planning department or the city can enact to be considering, limiting, displacement as much as we can through the planning process.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Any other members? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Bill is recommended. That takes us to our deferred paper, Bill 926.
Bill 926, resolution approving a conditional use application under the Pittsburgh Code Title 9 zoning Article 4 to Meyer, Unkovich, and Scott on behalf of 429 Forbes for the transfer of development rights involving 87 dwelling units from 201 Stanwick Street, GTB, Golden Triangle, Sub-District D, to 429 Forbes Avenue, Zone GTB, Golden Triangle, Sub-District B, First Ward, Council District 6.
Motion to hold 2 weeks.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Bill will be held 2 weeks. That takes us to our Intergovernmental Affairs Committee chaired by Councilwoman Gross. We have two deferred papers, Bill 779.
Bill 779, resolution requesting the approval of an intermunicipal transfer of liquor license from Avoder Enterprises, Inc. to the applicant Cabaret LLC for the premises located at 7928 Frankstown Avenue, known as Cabaret LLC, pursuant to amended Pennsylvania Liquor Code,
Motion to approve.
Second.
Second.
Councilwoman Elder or Councilman Burgess, I'll defer to you if you need discussion. You're muted, sir.
Of course. Okay. Thank you. I am asking for approval today. I am still working with the community. We will probably amend this application on final vote on Tuesday. We're still working. We do have a working document that we've been working through, but we're against the clock. That's number one. Number two, Councilman Cross, I have not forgotten your request in terms of how we've done this. We've asked the law department to kind of help us write it so that it's right. We've kind of done this by the seat of our pants, and I didn't want to give you kind of a wrong way of doing it. So I did not forget. I just asked them to formalize it so that it would be the same, so it would be right. That's all. We've kind of went from the middle out. We didn't do this in a straight line. So we're trying to figure out the straight line of how we were able to extend this and do this, if that makes some sense. So that's right. It's just we didn't forget. So we hope to have that to you this week too. So just letting you know I didn't forget.
Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. May I just quickly? So Councilman, I'm curious, the document that you're working on is a document that is an agreement between community and business owner that will ultimately be attached to the transfer of the liquor license?
Yes.
Yeah, good. I wasn't sure if the PLCB was still willing to accept those. And unless Councilman Gross, you know something.
I know, I was going to remind you that I did the first one for this council and that we've done a handful of others. And, you know, it has been a number of years since I talked to the PLCB attorneys, but they, what happened was after we passed it and it was attached and sent to Harrisburg as just an Exhibit A, all that their attorneys do then is include it in front of the PLC board. And then so when the PLC board votes on it, then it is a binding attachment, you know, a writer on the permit basically. And it stays with that address like the other ones, but.
Yeah, my only thought was, I don't know where this came from and maybe I imagined it, but I thought there was some discussion about the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board perhaps wavering a little bit on accepting those kinds of documents. I might be completely wrong. I was just curious.
If there's more news, yeah, but please do share if you find out anything. I appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Happy to support.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Bill is recommended. That takes us to Bill 959.
Bill 959, resolution requesting the approval of an intermunicipal transfer of liquor license from Armand and Arav to the applicant Burke Yolmas LLC for the premises located at 5440 Center Avenue, known as Pisa Palermo, pursuant to amended Pennsylvania Liquor Code.
Motion to approve discussion.
Second.
And also I'll defer to Councilman Strasburger if she's still here. If she has anything to add, she told me she was supportive.
I am supportive. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Bill is recommended. That takes us to our final bill of the day, Bill 1034.
Bill 1034, resolution authorizing the city to enter into a corporation agreement with PWSA to coordinate various stormwater and trail improvements in the 4 Mile Run watershed.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Bill is recommended. That does exhaust our agenda for today. I do have a number of meeting announcements. Next Monday, January 18th, council offices will be closed due to the observance of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Council's regular meeting will be on Tuesday, January 19th at 10 a.m. and standing committee meetings on Wednesday, January 20th at 10 a.m. Council will also hold a cablecast public hearing on Wednesday, January 20th at 2 p.m. on bills 943 and 944 as relate to the historic designation of the VA facility, chapel, and laboratory buildings. To register for the regular and standing committee meetings, please call the city clerk's office at 412-255-2138 by 9 a.m. on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, respectively. To register for the public hearing, please call by 12 noon on Wednesday. You may also register by going to the council meeting webpage and filling out the sign-up form in its entirety at pittsburghpa.gov/clerk/council meetings. Are there any announcement from members? Seeing none, we need a motion. All members.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I couldn't get off mute fast enough. Real quickly, if I can. I have been thinking a lot about this. There is an article I want to recommend the council looks at. I can point you to it. It's on the Columbia College of Arts and Sciences, George Washington University. It's on their website. Its article is by a guy by the name of Guy Lancaster. The name of the article is "A Modern Day Lynch Mob Invades the Capitol on January 6th." And of all the things I've read, and I've read a couple of articles like this, that's probably the clearest, that what we saw last week in the taking of the Capitol was not new in our country's history. It was just new in that form. What it was simply an old-fashioned lynch mob, right? They wanted to lynch Mike Pence. They lynched hundreds of Black people in the South this way. And there are three things the article talks about that the parallels. One is it was done openly, that they did not hide their identity. You know, in many of the lynchings that occurred in the South, and although, I mean, for those of us who are African American, my grandparents talked to me about this. My grandparents from Alabama and Georgia, you know, one of the ways they kept Blacks in line was not just the law. There was a clear understanding that if you stepped out of line, you could get hurt, you could get lynched, because the lynchings were very public. And so the first parallel is that it was open. I mean, they did it. People knew who they were, even though they were not charged. No one told. It was done often in broad daylight or in evenings with picnic baskets. It was a fairly public event. The second thing is going and getting souvenirs, right? You saw them carrying the podium, getting papers out of Speaker Pelosi's office. And when Blacks were lynched, you would see them taking bones from the victim or taking bits of the rope, and it became, you know, souvenirs. And then third of all, which is the most chilling, is the complicity with law enforcement. The law enforcement knew about it in some ways and conspired. Oftentimes they would not stop them, or, you know, post only one guard instead of a armament, which is what we saw at the Capitol. There was not a full armament of police officers. And then we saw, you know, officers taking selfies. And so that probably, I think, and you know, certainly the sort of anti-Jewish racist remarks that came out, I think that image makes the most sense to me. And I'm saying this publicly so other people could see it, but that's why for those of us who are African American, it resonates with us because we've known about this our whole lives. Our grandparents, our uncles, our aunts talked about this openly. And that's what you saw. You saw an old-fashioned white supremacist lynch mob at the Capitol. And we have to identify what it is, be very clear that that's what that is, understand that this is not a one-off. This is not a one-off. This is part of our history and our country that we have to exercise. We have to be very clear about it so that we can put the full force and weight of law enforcement, of morality against that occurring both in that form and then in smaller forms in terms of how, you know, African Americans are killed, not just by the hand of police officers, but sometimes also killed, you know, by the hands of civilians with the complicity of police officers. We have to cut that outrage out of our country. And so I suggest you take a look at it. I've read lots of stuff and talked to lots of friends and scholars about it, but that to me is, I think, the best caricature of what we saw was a modern day version of the historic lynch mob. And now my background comes on without me asking it. Thank you very much.
Councilman, will you share that by email, please?
Yeah, we are. I'll send you want the email, you want the text, or you want the link?
Just the link.
All right, I'll send it out in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything from any other members? Seeing none, we need a motion to approve the minutes and adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.
We are adjourned. Thank you.